Welcome back. A new book hitting the shelves tomorrow looks at the true story of a secret resistance network in Nazi Germany and a spy who would betray them. Earlier, I spoke to the author of The Traitors Circle, Jonathan Freedland. Take a look. Jonathan Freedland, you are not only an accomplished author, but someone who's still writing about current affairs for The Guardian. And you had some pretty notable observations just in the last few days regarding the president and his pursuit of a peace prize, and how you worry that that pursuit may be in conflict with how things are playing here at home.
Yeah, it struck me that while he's on the world stage, acting as the Nobel Peace Prize winner in waiting, at home he's Trump, bringer of war. I mean, he makes a speech to the assembled top brass of the military saying, I want you to focus on the enemy within, that he's sending troops onto the streets of American cities and being pretty upfront that they are cities in states that oppose him politically. And you speak to even quite sober-minded scholars of this, and they say these are the acts of someone who looks like he wants to foment a kind of second American Civil War. So I suggest that the judges of the Nobel Peace Prize, they'll be noticing that, as well as the stuff in the Middle East or in Russia, Ukraine.
And you point out, and there's been some conversation on the program today about this and in recent days broadly, that part of this may be a precursor to next year's midterm elections, where he may be trying to make deployments of troops the norm ahead of the next big go-round of the midterms.
Again, it's not just me who's saying this, but people who look at these things and over the historical span say the notion of normalizing something that would have seemed so abnormal, American troops who are used to fighting foreign enemies, instead told to use as training grounds American cities, it gets people used to the idea of a military presence. And we know just from elections all around the world, that intimidates voters often into not voting.
Right, yes. Now, you're here primarily because of your new book, The Traitors Circle. And I was struck in reading up on the origins of your interest in this, the fact that it was a real personal interaction, if you will, your family's with the war, and your mother's insistence that Germany not be discussed or purchased or supported in any way in your household growing up, that sort of piqued your interest in this period of history, right, when Hitler was rising to power.
That's absolutely right. That I grew up in a house where nothing German was allowed. No coffee makers, no car on the driveway. And that's because my own mother's mother was killed in the very last German rocket of the war, of the Blitz on London. When my own mother was 8, she lost her mother. And they've had a boycott of German goods. And what underpinned that was a belief that there was no good German, that every last German was involved in the war. Then I come across this story, a true story, astonishing story of 10 real Germans drawn from the upper echelons, the elite of Germany, including many from the aristocracy. There are 2 countesses in this book, who were all engaged in opposing, defying Hitler. And they gathered one day in September 1943, officially for a tea party. But what they didn't know is that one person sitting around the table with them, who they thought was one of their own, was instead about to betray all the rest to the Gestapo.
And you say the group defied Hitler for more than a decade, right? How do you research this period before things really picked up and find enough research to even build this book?
Well, I was astonished how much there is about these people. This was a time where people did write letters, they kept diaries, obviously in secret, but that were passed on to the next generation. And so I met some of the surviving children or grandchildren or great nieces and nephews of these people who had been forgotten by history, but they had left behind papers. One of the group did survive, many did not, and ended up, with a hangman's noose and the guillotine. But some who survived, one was a witness at the Nuremberg tribunals and was on the stand for several hours telling the story of this remarkable episode that had been sort of forgotten by history, but really at the time was huge. It led to a huge show trial in the center of Berlin. Hitler himself took a whole series of decisions based on this group once he found out about them. So this was of huge importance, and they left behind some papers, which I was able to read to write this book.
And that misconception that had persisted for so long, that every German was guilty, every German was a supporter, and your work here to remind us that there's always nuance. I wonder how that might be received by Germans or German readers, and I wonder also what your mother might think of it now in hindsight. I know she's not with us. But
she's not with us.
I just wonder what she'd think of the fact that you'd taken the time to do the work.
Yeah, I think it would be a jolt for her that her own son is finding the story. But I think it's important to say, I'm not saying, therefore, because there were some, therefore every other German was on the right side. On the contrary, there's a study that was done that suggests 95% of Germans fell in line. They did the Hitler salute. It was perhaps 5%, but that's still 3 million people who refused to raise their arm in a salute to Hitler and were engaged either in, like the group in this book, hiding Jews, rescuing Jews, spiriting them out of the country, or finding other ways to defy the Nazi regime. That was really important, I think, then. It's also important now because all around the world there are places where freedom is under assault and people are wrestling with the same dilemmas these amazing characters, I call them characters, they were real people, but that they wrestled with, which is what do you do when a tyrant is ruling or threatening to rule your country? When is the right moment? They had to make those decisions, and there are places all over the world where people are making those decisions all over again. And
in an era when nuance is difficult, certainly in the digital space, it's good to know that there's a reminder that there's a lot of that out there in different ways. Thank you so much, Jonathan Freedland, for sharing it with us. Best of luck on the book tour, and good to meet you.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks very much.